Hi, this is Bill Fournette, CEO of the Persimmon Group, and I'm excited to share with you today one of my favorite techniques. It's called the SITREP. The SITREP falls into the same place where a lot of status reporting or communication occurs, typically with project teams, but it could be with a departmental or multidisciplinary team that's working on some effort. And it's the whole purpose of that is to improve the way we communicate, and as a leader to understand the situation that's occurring in that project or that effort as was intended by the project team. So let's get started. First, what I want to share with you is why a SITREP is important, how it's different than a status report, and then I'm going to get into what a SITREP is. And then we're going to share the how and some best practices that will improve the way you communicate inside the SITREP itself. So to start us off with, I love this quote by the playwright George Bernard Shaw because I see this so many times in project teams and just in organizations in general. And that is the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it occurred. So I want you to stop and think about that. When you ask about what's the status of something, do you find that you really walk away with a good understanding of where that thing is, a project, whatever it may be? Or do you find that you're just getting a lot of information that's coming at you, and you are having to then kind of be the detective and put those pieces of information together? That's because so many things in our environments have become just checklists. They just become part of what we do every week, and which is a good thing, by the way. It's good to have a rhythm of things. But a checklist just says, check the box. I move on to the next thing. And a status report by far has become one of these check the box items. So think about what kind of status reporting you get today. How well do you understand the state of what that effort is in? Do you find that your status reports often look like this? I have 4 bullets with a summary of recent activity, 3 bullets underneath it, and 1 bullet under that issues. If you need to pause this for a moment to kind of read it, ask yourself when you read this, if you were a leader or if you're reading it from outside of this team, how well do you understand what's going on in this project? I see 50% of engineering design complete. Does that give you a good sense? I see at the bottom that says, have not received material from a supplier. If I'm a leader, do I take action on that? Or is somebody else taking action on that? This is pretty typical of what we see in so many teams today. And ask yourself, is this what you're seeing? Yes, I have a percent complete, but what does that mean? Am I almost done? I get 50% done, but is it where I'm supposed to be? And here's why this has become an issue. Traditional status reports no longer bring value, or at least the value that they used to bring. They've become very stale. They've become literally a check-the-box exercise that we're just moving through our week or every 2 weeks to send up to other people to let them know, here's what's going on in our project. One of the key things that we find with status reporting is that it assumes that the reader understands what's going on in the project, like they're part of the project team, that they understand some of the jargon, that they understand the context or the meaning behind what's happening inside the project. But with what I just showed you a moment ago at 50% complete, does that give you understanding of how we're doing? Are we doing well? Or are we maybe falling behind? Or are we just right where we should be? And that's because in a sense, status reports, especially when there's multiple parties involved, third-party vendors, etc., have become almost a CYA. Don't you remember last month on page 5, I had that as an issue in my status report. Nobody took action on it, and now it's become a bigger issue. Not my fault. I shared it. So I want to change that whole situation. And to change it, we've got to go down to back to the fundamentals. All communication that we perform, I want you to think about this. All communication falls into one of these 3 words or buckets. We're either giving information or asking for information because it's literally just to inform us. That's like your FYI. I want to give you this as background. Or I'm asking for information from you. The second is I'm sharing a decision or I'm asking for a decision. And is it clear to the consumer, the reader, the receiver, what's the status? Are you telling me you made this decision? Or are you asking me to make a decision? And the third is around action. I'm either giving you an action and asking you to go take action, or you're giving me action and asking me to go take action. And so when you think about that, everything that we say and do, even just as human beings, falls into one of these three buckets. And so the art form here in status reporting is, can I provide a very simple, clear, direct, and purpose-driven status report that enables the reader to walk away with all three of these items clearly? And if you're having a struggle already with that part, one of the things I recommend and I advise a lot of leaders with is start asking for people to report their status in these three buckets. That's a good basic discipline that just says, hey, here's information items. Here's decisions being asked or shared. Here's actions that are being shared to date and or being asked going forward. And if you have that challenge, just by bringing and asking people to report it, you can do it in an email with 3 headers. Tell me the things that are actions, tell me the things that are decisions, and tell me the things that are informational only. By doing that, you'll start to improve and coach your team into better discipline in how they communicate amongst these 3 buckets. So let's switch over and say now, what's a SITREP and how is this so different than a status report? The first is that a situation report, or SITREP, is usually given verbally or written, and it came out of the military. And I want to share that because the background of a SITREP coming out of the military and how it's used there is crucial to understanding how you apply it in a business or a project situation. So first of all, when it's done verbally, it's usually given in about 2 to 3 minutes. It should be fast, whatever's being given. Even if I'm reading it, maybe 5 minutes maximum, depending on how intense the project is. I should be able to, within 5 minutes, understand what the status of the project is. Now, I may have multiple pages of background data that's giving me cost reporting to my say my actuals versus my planned. It may give me some schedule or timeline data. I can have all of that. But the key is that within 2 to 3, maybe 5 minutes written, I should understand where the project is. And so what it's doing is trying to be able to give you that information in a, again, simple, direct, purpose-driven approach. And it contains these elements, 4 basic headers, if you will, or elements. What's the situation to date? Okay, I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Actions to date, which is very typical in most projects. It just says these are the things we've accomplished. These are the things we did over the last couple of weeks or since the last status report. Here's the things that need to be completed. Again, very common with the status report. These are the things that we need to be doing over the next week, 2 weeks, whatever that timeline may be. Any issues, risks, or decisions needed. So this goes back to that inform, decide, do, or act. And in doing so, you're just laying that out clearly to the reader of here's the issues that are out there right now, here's the risks that we're seeing, and here are decisions that we need from you, reader or leader, whoever that may be. Back to situation to date. So let me give you a quick example of how this was used in the military that I think will really color in how this could apply differently for you in your business environment. In the military, let's assume that I'm an officer and you are my commanding officer. And I am leading a platoon, let's say, into a village, and suddenly we end up in a combat situation. I start calling back to headquarters asking for help, possibly extraction or maybe more reinforcements. When I call that, my commanding officer, you in this situation, are going to be listening. How well is he giving me the situation to date? Is he reading that situation properly? Or is he overreacting? Or underreacting, maybe? And is doing so, not only are you looking for me to give you clarity of information, which is that background, is that context, not just the background. So I may be giving you some information points, but am I giving you a sense where you feel you're with me right now in that situation? And that I'm making and giving that context correctly. So if I'm not, now as a commanding officer, you may ask me some questions. You're trying to coach me so that I can give a better assessment quickly so you can then make a decision about what actions you may need to take. So it's really important of that situation to date, of giving that, because that context or meaning is one of the fundamental differences between a SITREP and what we traditionally have been seeing in status reporting. So to add to that, okay, here's a great way of testing a SITREP of do you understand the situation to date. The key here is by taking the complexity of everything that's going on in my team, my work, everything, boiling that down to make it simple and to provide enough context or meaning that it can pass what we call the airport test. So the airport test assumes this. You have written a SITREP, or status report, whatever you want to call it, but it's for us, we're going to call it SITREP. You accidentally leave it on the chair at the airport. A person who has no understanding of what you do, who you are, they just find the piece of paper. They pick it up and they can read it. And from reading it, they can understand the basic context of what's going on in the situation for your project. That's the airport test. A layperson can pick it up and they understand, okay, this is important or urgent. Here's what's kind of going on. I get a sense of like, I'm almost there. That's what you want to be able to challenge yourself in the writing of your SITREP. So I'm going to switch over and show you some examples. You're welcome to pause the video at any point to think about what's going on in each of these sections of an actual SITREP. So this is an example of a SITREP that came through as a subject line. You'll see here's the situation itself. So pause that for a moment and ask yourself, based on it, do you have kind of a sense of what's going on right now with this particular situation? Okay, so you look at that and you see we finalized negotiations. We also have completed the PO, but we must complete an on-site audit of the manufacturer due to quality, safety, and financing issues described below. So you can see this is what we've done, and now we are about to go complete this on-site audit, and you'll notice even in the subject line it says that there's a request for action. So here it's giving some action to date, which is that we completed the verbal negotiations, and it has the date. Then it says here's the next steps. So complete the purchase order, currently on track to be completed per the schedule, provided an on-site trip is authorized by this date. Now stop right there. As if you were the leader receiving this and you're wondering what's going on, let's say this is one of your most important projects. When you read that, do you now have a quick sense of at least here's what's going on in the situation, where they are in their process or their life cycle of work, here's what just occurred, which is this one action to date, and here's the next step that needs to occur, but also not just that it needs to occur, but by when it needs to happen in order to ensure we don't have an impact. Now the last part of this has the requested actions. And in this case, it's sharing from a requested action what it's asking the reader or the consumer to do here. It's asking you to please approve the assumptions for cost. Here's what you're going to get from it. Here's what the cost is. So in that one piece, I have the situation to date. I have here's the actions that have occurred. Here's the actions about to come. And here's the decision or action I am asking the reader of this to do. So how does that compare to what you see as your status reports today? Do you walk away with that same understanding, or do you walk away with maybe more questions than answers, and you feel like you have to reach out to the person who gave it to you to go get those answers? That's the difference between these two. Give it meaning in the SITREP. Give it context versus what you've seen sometimes in the status report. This is another example. This is one where when you read the situation, it's a little bit different format. Okay, this was one that worked for a project team inside of a company. Same elements are there in the SITREP, but they're just structured a little different based on what the team or the leadership team was asking for. So pause this, and at the end of reading the situation, ask yourself, do you understand at least what's going on right now in the project? So for me, when I was reading this gives me a sense right now of saying I may not be involved in the project at all. This is that airport test. But I have an understanding that there's a really key decision that's coming up here in whatever the dates, fill in the dates, we're about to be. And so it says it's going to involve substantial augmentation of the team. It's going to be presented to the client on a certain date. Now the second part of that same SITREP was written like this. What this means for the company, which was in this case the company that is doing the work. And that meant that this SITREP was being written for the leadership of the company. So what this says, now read this, pause it for a moment, ask yourself at the end, do you understand what is important and what this means for the company who's reading this? And second, what are some of the opportunities that it has? Okay. So in this case, as the company, I see, okay, wow, I'm not even on this team. And in just a few words, I have an understanding of the key decisions that are coming to date. I see that this could be actually a tremendous opportunity for the company. And now I'm trying to figure out, how do we take that, and are we prepared to be able to go and leverage it? How would that compare instead of a project, if the same project occurred for this situation and just said, you know what, we're on track. We're on a green status, we're 50% done with a bunch of deliverables, we're on track. Does this give you a different understanding? I would say it does. Because I feel the way it was written, I'm there. I understand it. Kind of like that commanding officer say to that platoon leader in that combat situation. They need to have a sense of, are you assessing the situation, not just correctly, but completely. So with that, let's switch over now into some how, some things that can improve the context and the writing around your status reporting, as well as specifically your SITREP. The first is, I want to put up here are the 5 C's. The 5 C's are just a way of remembering how well are we communicating. And they come out loud and clear in a well-written SITREP. The first is consistent. Consistency is about, are we using the same language, or are we bringing new terms in? Consistency gets into your ability to be able to say across team members, I had the same flow or format. All right, and so in that example of what I showed you on those 2 different examples of the SITREPs, one followed the kind of traditional example of a SITREP. Situation to date, actions completed, actions to be completed, and any risk issues or decisions being asked for. Second one took a little bit different format and said, I got the situation to date, what does this mean for the company and what opportunities do we need to take? Both those work. The key is, are you kind of consistent in your approach so that people reporting it don't feel like they're being yo-yoed with a different format, different approach each time? Second is confidence. This is the question of, are you speaking with what you do know, what you don't know, and if you don't know it, do you know if you can go find it? So what I believe fundamentally, especially when we're reporting status, okay, there's gray in all the world that we live in, the things that we do. There's the gray versus the black and white. But when we communicate status, it needs to be crystal clear. Either yes, no, I don't know, but maybe I know where to go get the information, or I don't know where. That's what I mean by confidence. If a person came in to report status to you and said, well, I think we're having a few problems here, and you ask some questions like, are we on track? Well, I think we are. I'm not really sure. How does that compare to going in and saying, we run into a couple of issues. I've got some data points that are being gathered by my team from the vendor. I should have those data points by 4 p.m. today. I don't know what the direction or the answer is yet. We're assessing a couple of risks, but can I give you an update by 5 p.m. today on what I recommend, what the next steps are, and if there's any impact to the project? I'm not delivering necessarily great news in that case, but what leaders focus on is they don't focus on whether or not you know all the answers. That's what a lot of failures of project team members is, that they think they have to have all the answers. They are measuring you and judging you based on their confidence in your ability to go find the answers. So be clear with what you do and don't know. And that kind of leads us into the next one, which is concise. If it only takes 3 sentences to say what you're trying to say in 4 paragraphs, say it in 3 sentences. Be concise, and that's one of the reasons I love the SITREP, is because it forces you to boil the context or the meaning down into just a paragraph or a few sentences. Be concise, and you will be rewarded and thanked for it by leadership. And the second with that is be clear. Don't use vague terms. It goes back to the more vague or unclear you are, the lower the confidence also starts to come towards you, let alone whether or not you know something. State things clearly, concisely, and consistently. And then lastly, and this is the one you've heard me say now several times in this session, is you want to provide context. Context is the meaning or background so that the reader doesn't have to infer, assume, or imply what it is you mean. You're giving that to them. You're giving them the meaning. So I want to give you an example, going back to that original status report that I shared with you. If I was to take the same status report, but now I added just a little bit of phrase after that, have completed 50% of the engineering design, on track for committed completion date. Do you now understand where that 50% is? I do. It says that we're not just 50% done, but we are planning or at least forecasting we're still on track. If I said held 2 requirements meetings with the customers, they were we have 2 more, but they were delayed a week due to customer availability, still should make the target. Okay, now I may ask a question that says, all right, so what happens if they delay these 2? I get not just the update that they're giving me, but they're telling me what's coming and that it was a delay, which kind of says, okay, wait a minute, is this still going to be okay? But they're reminding me on the back end, no, right now they believe we're still on target. Completed the customer estimate. It's been under review since 12/12. Customer said they look good on the first pass. Now, does 12/12 give me enough bearing on that or understanding? It depends. It depends on when the actual status report was being created. I could go back to this individual and say, with this one, are we still on track, or is this an issue around the customer estimate? And they say, no, we're still on track. Then I could say, great. Next time, will you just note that also with that line, or let me know if you think we're starting to trail behind on this? Do you see how I'm kind of, by adding just a few words to this, getting a better understanding that reduces the need for me to likely email or call somebody and ask, hey, what did you mean by this one update in your status report? Now the last one. The last one's real. I've seen this with clients left and right, where a leader looks at this and think about this. You're the project manager. You're the one that submits the status. There's a leader who is over procurement, looks at that and goes, oh, which supplier is that? I'll give them a call. And suddenly they go call a supplier, create an escalation when all you were trying to do was share it as an FYI. Totally unintentional. But now you've got 2 issues you're dealing with. The supplier who may not be happy with you, and now a boss that kind of just created a new challenge for your team. So if instead they had said, escalated within the supplier, will receive part by end of day tomorrow, still expect to ship the part tomorrow on time. So in that case, if I read that as a leader, would I have had better understanding that says, okay, I don't need to go maybe take action on this. I just need to be aware of it. That's what you're trying to bring into your status report or your SITREP, whatever you want to call it. I like the concept of using the SITREP because of that situation to date. It forces the dialogue that says, are you giving me meaning or context? So let's switch over to a few best practices before we wrap up. On the best practice side, one of the key things I want teams to be, and this is where you can coach them on as well, is who are you writing the situational report or the status report for? Okay, is it going out to the customer? And recognize that what you share with the customer may not be what you're sharing for the internal awareness, for your own team to be aware of, which is probably going to be more detailed and more tactical. Or is it going up to your boss, to leadership? And in that case, you again may not share all of the details that you're sharing internally. Because what happens is, you probably have experienced as well, if you overshare details to leadership, they start to wonder that because you're sharing so many details, maybe there's more stuff or issues that are going on than they were aware of. And it almost creates more of an issue because they want to dive in and help try to either solve or assess if you're judging the situation properly. Now, one little trick that I love is in writing status reports or SITREPs is write for 2 levels above you in your organization. And here's what that means. It's a great way of coaching an individual, or if it's you doing this, you're writing it with the idea of what would your boss's boss be asking your boss. So write the SITREP to address questions and concerns that you believe your boss's boss may be asking. This helps immensely. It also starts to get you, or whoever the person is that's writing the situational report, into thinking in terms of what questions would that level of my organization be asking. And in doing so, the analysis and the meaning behind a SITREP gets stronger and stronger. Okay, 5 additional best practices that I've got here, followed by 5 more, so you're going to get a total of 10. The first is, as I mentioned, write that SITREP for 2 levels above. Second is, you want it to be 2 to 3 minutes verbal, 3 to 5 minutes written. And I want you to think about that, where you can then go add and ask for more detail behind the scenes. But the basic understanding of where that project is or that effort is needs to be understood in 2 to 3 minutes verbal. The second is or third is that it should provide the period of time just really between the last situation report. So the key that you want to do is you don't want to do this cumulative thing that just keeps adding more layers, adding more things on there, unless it's because it's like issues that you haven't resolved. You could always refer out to a previous version of the SITREP. It needs to be factually based. Number 4, this is crucial. If you're going to put in anecdotes or you're going to put in your own opinion, note this as in my opinion, or I'm speculating, or we believe this could be because of that. The reader needs to understand what the actual facts or data is to try to remove misinterpretation. And if you want to give them some guidance in saying, hey, this is what we believe and why we believe it, state that. You're also looking to deconflict all of that information, which means that you're trying to remove personal pronouns and actually say Department X, this person, or this function, or vendor Y. You're trying to put that actually in the SITREP versus saying they, or them, or you, or she. And then the fifth one is, as I mentioned at the beginning, so crucial. Focus on meaning of the data and trends. What leaders appreciate is when they see that the data or the facts are being provided in context for them to now digest them quickly and understand and then see if they've got additional questions. That's different than just getting a bunch of data and then trying to go be that, again, that detective to go put the pieces together and figure out what's really going on inside this project. Last 5. First is prevent surprises. So one of the things in a SITREP to note, and this helps a lot, is if a condition has changed in the effort itself, what you thought was going to happen or an assumption changed, to bring that to light. Don't assume that the reader has understood that something has changed in your world. So if you were going down on a project and working towards it, and suddenly there was a key decision or a key assumption about a tool or a technology that somebody was using, and you find out that that's not the case, and it's impacting your effort, bring that up in the SITREP itself. Okay, the one I shared with you earlier that dealt with going and doing the on-site audit talked about what the next steps needed to be as it related to some of the conditions on the ground happening of where that purchase order was in the process. Go back, read that one, see how it took the reader along to understand where we were. Number 7 is if it's for a specific given functional area, then don't get outside the functional area. That just essentially don't cloud or confuse the reader with information that may not be relevant to the functional area or focus of your SITREP. Sometimes people will start putting into even status reports stuff that's going on in the world around them that's not really relevant to what we're working on within our scope or our project or our need. Stay focused on that. All right. Number 8, if there is no change since the last SITREP, okay, then you can say see last SITREP for information, meaning that you don't need to put a new update or a change and just repeat everything again. Because as a leader, if they get 2 different versions or 2 dates of SITREPs, they're usually going to assume that the newer one has got updates in it. You can be really concise and say no update here, or see last SITREP for what the current situation is, meaning nothing's changed. Now they're going to come back probably and ask, why has nothing changed? But it just depends on what the nature of your effort is. That's a good use for when you've got a project that has gone on hold. Having the rhythm of producing a SITREP is worthwhile, even when you're on hold. But you're just noting, hey, go see previous SITREP, nothing's changed. Number 8, if there is no change since the last number 9, if a map or other graphics are necessary that you need to have, a visualization, then share that visualization as part of it as a reference. And you can just note that, because here's what happens. In a lot of status reports, we'll get clouded with there's so many pages of visuals, of pictures, that you lose the sense of readability of the document itself. Because you're trying to capture in that moment them reading through this almost like a story, and for them to understand this is what's going on in the situation. So reading and all of a sudden seeing maps and tables and graphics can become really confusing, because what it does is it takes the reader, this is again during the situational report portion, not the appendix, it takes the reader out of this broad understanding mindset and drops them immediately into the details. And it's hard to go back up Think of it like you're staring at the tree versus the forest. It's hard to go all the way back out again, and it causes the reader to often become confused. So take those things, reference them out to another part, give them the context of how it might relate, but let them go check in the appendix or the next several pages of where that is. And then lastly, small one, simple one, save each SITREP as a new file in the same folder. It allows a person, if they want to go read the history of the SITREPs, what has evolved, what's developed, they can go back to a point in time, and then they can move themselves forward. So with that, I hope you enjoyed the SITREP itself. Take that along with the template that we provided you and start applying it. My recommendation is give them the basic outline of what the SITREP is, challenge them to come back with how they would report it, and then flip over, give them feedback on what they're doing well and where they need to make adjustments. With that, good luck with your SITREPs. We'll see you soon.